بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we are now into the 3rd century. So Imam Shafi, obviously 204, he dies in the beginning of the 3rd century. So now we're into the 3rd century and the Shafi school exists. It has a theoretical structure, usul al-fiqh. It has substantive legal structure, meaning what are the actual discussions and what do we say on them. And then in the midst of that, there are what's called qawaid fiqhiyya, which is legal maxims. And then we have initiates, right? We have initiates, right? We spoke about that with the whole quote from Ibn Khaldun, that you don't just see something and become part of that system. You have to be initiated. So people who have studied with Imam Shafi'i and they've cracked the system from him, and they themselves are now people who use this system. So this is a key concept. You have to be an initiate. You have to become a colleague. You have to become part of the system. Okay, so many people will come along and say, yeah, I'm a Shafi'i, meaning I'm attempting to follow Shafi'i way of working, but they're not, because they've never gone through the ropes. They haven't been trained, right? And then so now what's going to happen is this process of expansion of the school is either revisiting fundamental, substantive legal questions. For example, Ibn Mundhir passes away in the 4th century. He's gonna say, is it really true that the awrah of a man is between the navel and the knee? Yes or no? Proof from the Quran, proof from the Sunnah, the Fatawa, the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Do I agree with this conclusion of the Shafi school? Yes or no? Or building on previous conclusions uh, of methodology. So we've already concluded X, now we're going to conclude Y. Okay? So one of these two things. Both of these are ijtihad. Both of these are ijtihad. So what's the difference then? So now let's compare someone like Imam al-Tahawi, right? So we said Imam al-Muzani. Imam al-Tahawi's nephew, he looks at the Shafi'i school, doesn't agree with the Shafi'i school, so he shifts from functioning as a Shafi'i to functioning as a Hanafi. His system is now Hanafi. So if you disagree with somebody, you say, do you disagree in terms of usul or do you disagree in terms of furu'? Is it your approach is different or is it your conclusion of the approach is different? A or B? He says, right? You choose A or B. If it's B, then you need to be trained in the system, understand the system, and then we will value your your constructive criticism. But if you come along and criticize the Shafi'i school when you're not a Shafi'i and you don't understand the Shafi'i system, it's not a useful comment. It's just useless. Similarly, so then the debate then between Shafi'is and non-Shafi'is will be on the usul level. So this is how a normal classical discussion happens. It's either Shafi'is talking to Shafi'is, okay, or usul al-fiqh people talking to usul al-fiqh people. So it's a Hanafi talking to a Shafi'i about high-level discussions, or a Shafi'i talking to a Shafi'i about low-level discussions. It does not make any sense for a Shafi'i to talk to a Hanafi about low-level discussions because we don't agree on the high level to begin with. Does that make sense?
By high level, do you mean fundamentals?
The fundamentals, yeah. So, as an example, you have just come from communist China and you're discussing, right, you're working, you are now a politician in you are now a Republican in America, and you're discussing, you're trying to prioritize healthcare and things like that. And the discussion's going round and round and round, and you're always trying to prioritize healthcare and increase taxation, da, 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 da. And they realize, Habibi, fundamentally, you do not believe in our same political idea. So don't talk about the specifics of how the Republicans are going to respond to this situation or how they should look at public spending or taxation, because you don't, on a high level, you don't agree with this whole way of looking. You're basically a communist. You promote something like 80% tax, which is not how it works for a normal Republican. So you're debating on a low level thing, how much taxation should be on this, how much taxation should that, how much should we spend, da, da, da. And they realize you don't even agree with us. Go somewhere else then. So a fruitful discussion would be then, let's debate communism versus capitalism, capitalism versus this, right? Whatever it is, a high level. And then we adopt a political system and then the specifics of how that should come out into healthcare, whatever decisions, wars, etc. Does that make sense? Right? We're going to come up with a high level discussion of how parenting should happen. To what extent should parents be involved in general? And then we get to the specifics of what does that mean today? Should Johnny be allowed to play on his PlayStation or not? But if you don't agree on the high level, go and sort that out somewhere else. So these are fruitful discussions. We're going to discuss usul al-fiqh, the high level discussion, or the low level discussion. But what happens today is stupid discussions because you're neither nor. You're neither trained in a madhab nor you're trained in usul. It's just what's the correct position? What's right? What's wrong? So it doesn't even mean anything. It's a useless discussion. It's a dumb discussion. Not an interesting discussion at all. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? So we have to be, this is society functions in that way, right? Society functions in that way. It doesn't function, this is how academics work. So like intelligent people. Dumb people or unsophisticated people, yes, they do hot air. They say stupid things. Like bomb Arabs because they're terrorists. So like there's multiple errors in the whole way of thinking, right? So even if people are terrorists, should you bomb them? How does it work? To what extent can one country, in theory, get involved in another country? Can a country penalize another country for doing something, right? How does that work? How should that work? You deal on a high level and then you come down to a low level at the application. Okay. So none of these people are A, untrained, B, discussing now the high level. They're discussing the low level, which is fundamental substantive law, the halal and haram itself. Or, so they're either revisiting or they're building on new scenarios. Because if you want to now debate the high level, the usul itself, go somewhere else. Talk about that somewhere else, not here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So this is critical thinking. It is ijtihad, but in which realm? Yeah? The kittens have been kicked out. The kittens left a number of moist things everywhere, Sham. So they are now in jail. They're actually in kitty jail. It's pretty bad. You should come and see them. They're in the kitty jail right next to my office. They're substantive fundamental errors in their legal conclusions. Yeah. Um, okay. What was I going to say? Makes sense, guys. So now this is useful. So a Salafi, Wahhabi, and I hate using words because I really don't like labels, but I have to use it. It's going to have these pointless discussions with you. But the hadith says this. So you have to say, stop. Define your process of processing hadiths. He says, oh, I process it as the Salaf did. That's not a process. As Dr. Ramadan Bulti, he says, a Salaf, the early Muslims, is a blessed epoch, a blessed period in time. It is not a methodology. That's not a methodology. So you need to define your methodology. So stop, define your methodology, and then come back. And let us talk about your methodology. I don't want to talk about whether touching my wife breaks my wudu or not. It's not a useful discussion. Let's talk about usul al-fiqh. So go and talk usul al-fiqh. That's a class in usul al-fiqh. Go there. That's a discussion in another topic, not in fiqh. Because fiqh, you're going to say, assuming the Shafi'i approach is correct, now we're going to talk. Assuming the Hanafi fiqh is approach is, we're going to take something because we've already come to that conclusion, and now we're going to assume something. But so that's why what you'll do at university today, right? In most Islamic universities, what you'll do is you do introduction to fiqh, general ideas, introduction to prayer. Okay, there are 4 positions to this, 8 positions to this, proofs for and against, and it's all very nebulous, and you're not really getting to any real discussion. But you think you're getting to a discussion, and you feel like you know what you're talking about. But in reality, it's not actual, real academic at all. Okay, so how do we learn fiqh then? You either do usul al-fiqh, that's a science. In theory, how should we process this raw material from revelation? And then we're going to take an approach, one of these four madahib, and work within it, either revisiting fundamental substantive conclusions or building on previous conclusions. That's what we're going to do. That's the realm of the discussion. If you're not doing this, you've downloaded the wrong app, or you're using the wrong app for the wrong thing, right? Like I'm trying to play this game on my phone, okay? Have you ever played this game, Badr? It's called Uber Eats. But like I never win, and I always get disturbed when this guy rings the bell. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
You
I
also
I usually win though,
usually win. How do you
uh,
win?
be- because I buy and eat.
Oh, you buy and eat. Yeah, but I'm trying to win the game. I'm trying to get to the bad guy. I never managed to kill him. I can't find him to begin with. Guys, you get the joke? Like, it's not a it's not a game. Uber Eats is to order food, Habibi. That's what it's for, right? It's not for designing food. It's not for playing games. It's for order. And so I'm thinking I'm trying to design food through Uber Eats. That's not what it's for. That's a different thing. So every single science has a function and it fits in something. You don't understand the basics, and so you're just chaotic. And so you're frustrated with Uber Eats because you never find the bad guy and can never kill him, right? It's like, and then you keep disturbed by getting disturbed that by some guy ringing on the doorbell giving you food. I mean, it's great. I'm glad you gave me food, but like I'm trying to get the bad guy, you know? And it's like, what are you doing, Farid? You don't understand the basics. You don't understand what this thing is. Okay? So make sense? This is what we do in Shafi fiqh is revisit the fundamental substantive conclusions based on the Shafi approach or build on previous conclusions based on the Shafi approach. Somebody who can do that is somebody who has to be trained. If you're not trained, it's not useful. You're not welcome. Your contributions are not welcome. You're not of the ashab. Okay, so we mentioned, for example, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Marwazi, Ibn Mundhir, these people, for example, who are famous for not really building up substantive thing, but revisiting fundamental substantive legal conclusions. Okay, but they work as Shafi'is. They are Shafi'is. They've been trained as Shafi'is. The system is Shafi'i. As opposed to, I just follow Quran and Sunnah, you don't have a system. Okay, and so we saw this quote last week from Tajuddin al-Subki. He says the four Muhammads that we just quoted, they are still considered Shafi'is and not considered to be working outside the school or not following his madhab because their independent reasoning, ijtihad, agrees with his even if they disagree with him on many issues. This is because they followed his methodology mostly in their research methods. Okay, so somebody who doesn't have a research method or who has not been trained in a research method is just simply not a researcher. It's simply not a faqih. It's simply not a scholar. So when somebody says to you, you ask somebody, are you a Shafi'i or a Maliki or anything that says neither nor, that means you're just untrained. That's what it means. Simple as that. You're just untrained. So critical thinking then, are you going to adopt the same methodology? Yes or no? In which case, you're either going to find another methodology or create a new methodology. If you are going to follow the same methodology, you're either going to revisit the fundamental questions in that science based on the same methodology, or you're going to build on previous conclusions based on the same methodology. Okay? So, for example, famous people in that early period of those who built on previous conclusions, like Ibn al-Haddad, you had the book Al-Muwalladat, the newly born scenarios. Imam Shafi says X, therefore I'm going to say Y. Ibn al-Qasi said Imam Shafi said this, therefore I'm going to say Y, right? Okay, so now a revisionist comes along and says, hey, the madhabs are great, but they need to be revisited. Wrong. Every objection you could imagine has already been raised. So if it's an objection in methodology, it's an usul fiqh. You can go discuss it there. It's all discussed. An objection to the conclusions. Does this methodology come to this conclusion? We've already debated it. It's already there. Somebody has already objected, and somebody's already adopted this position, and somebody's already objected to that objection and to that objection. They've gone back and forward and back and forward and back and forward and back and forward. We've already done that. We have already done that. Okay. Uh, it's already there. Every question has already been answered. You just haven't read it or you don't understand it. Okay, so now that expansion happens into the third. Go ahead, Badr.
Um, so I was wondering, I know like oftentimes people will they'll ask questions that have already been answered like many times, but are most of those answers actually found in books that are authored by like the four Shafi'is or Imam Shafi'i himself or Imam Nawawi, or is it many of them are actually just word of mouth, like taught through
No, no, no.
like
So
the
no,
teacher
no.
student?
So nothing's so word of mouth is something at a certain stage, is a certain stage in learning. Otherwise, everything's in the books. So there's lots and lots of books. There's lots of books that
Okay,
I'm
so you should be able to find like
yeah, you should be able to find it. Yeah.
just as like an example, I was debating with one of my friends the other day who he believes that the praying with your hands on the side is not sunnah, so Malikis are not following the sunnah,
Yeah.
and he is a guy who would say, he is somebody who would say that it's he follows Quran and sunnah, but what he was told was that the Malikis saw Imam Malik praying with his hands on the side, and he couldn't raise his hands because he was tortured, so they
Yeah.
just
Well,
followed him like
but that's
that.
just like that's just stupid, right? That's basically
Yeah,
stupid. So
yeah, because
here's the
I
mental
never.
idea is that basically our scholars are stupid. Like, sorry to you, that's the word. And so it's like our scholars are dumb and stupid, and we just blindly follow them. So that's just not the reality of it at all, right? It's just not. So that's kind of obvious, right? Like, so
Yeah,
like,
yeah, I mean,
I have a
me,
quote. I can't share it here of early Shafi'i Maliki saying, who is it? One of the early Maliki says, "Lesna abidan li Malik." We are not slaves of Imam Malik. They would never have done that. So the debate exists in the Maliki school. It is an issue of debate. Do you pray with your hand by your side or not? And then they're going to go back and forward, and you can see it. You will be able to see the discussions, who said this and who said that, what was the proofs for and against, and which position actually represents the school. But the point is, what he needs to do is understand Maliki usul. Do you follow Maliki usul? Yes or no? No. Go somewhere else then. Don't talk to me about the specifics when you don't agree with the high level. Okay, get to the high level, then which system do you agree with then? Right? Find us a system that makes sense, learn it properly, study it properly, and then come to a conclusion. But what he's doing is useless. It's a useless thing, right? He doesn't actually, it's like you're criticizing, you're criticizing something on a neither high level nor low level. You're just confused. You don't actually know what you're doing. And this is the intention, just create confusion, right? It's not actually
yeah,
it's not so it's not that we don't value debate. We value debate. The issue is constructive debate. It's just a useless conversation because they don't actually know what they're talking about. Does that make sense?
yeah, yeah, I understand.
Right? It's like, when talking about male and female, they're like, what's a male? No, they can't define it, right? What's a female? They can't define it. It's like that means this person's just like irate. The person's just angry about things. Like there's something off, but they don't know what they're talking about. Good question. What constitutes a critical mass of Shafi scholars as compared to laity to ensure effective guidance? So we're talking in the hundreds, right? We are talking in the hundreds, if not thousands. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. But the mass is not always the only thing that counts. It's not always. Yeah, but it does happen like that. So you have anyway thousands of Shafi'is, hundreds of thousands of answers, and lots of books. So now we have an issue. This is all ijtihad. It's all done by people who it's the same interpretive principle, so it's not chaotic. So a Salafi does not have fixed usul, so it's chaotic. Okay. They have the same legal maxims. A Salafi doesn't have that. He's just confused, right? And they are all initiates. The Salafi has not been trained in a madhab because for him being trained in a madhab is called taqleed, and taqleed is haram. So you don't do that. And so, but these are graduates. So that's what the Salafi doesn't understand. The difference between being initiated into a system, abiding by a system and graduating from a system so that you can work on a higher level. They don't see that. They just see it all as you either question or you don't. And if you don't question, you're just blindly following, which is bad. And if you do question, it's good. But they don't understand the whole system. I'm talking about from experience. Like I've spoken to big popular Salafis, and they actually don't understand that discussion. You're talking to them, they fundamentally don't understand what's going on. So as you mentioned, Abu Ishaq al-Isfaraini claimed that our colleagues, these people who've been trained in the system and graduated from the system, are not blind followers of Imam Shafi because they themselves have all the prerequisites of independent legal reasoning. And this is another thing that the average Salafi does not have. Does not have the prerequisites of independent legal reasoning. He actually doesn't understand what's going on a fundamental level, right? In terms of language, in terms of grammar, in terms of morphology, in terms of ulum al-Quran, in terms they don't actually have what they're not really that interesting, right? Some are, but by default they don't actually have the basic things to begin with. They are only labeled as Shafis because they follow his methodology in legal reasoning. He said that this is the truth, and the later scholars confirmed that. Okay, so we mentioned all this. We mentioned this as well. 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 We mentioned the key concept that Imam Shafi didn't know all the hadiths. That's true. Even if Imam Shafi didn't know all the hadiths, the school knows all the hadiths. Even if Imam Malik doesn't know all the hadiths, the school knows the hadiths. It's not possible that the Hanafis have this piece of information that there's gone past them. It's not possible, right? We're looking at the collective output of the whole school, not at the Imam. So therefore, you cannot have an ad hominem argument against the Imam and saying he didn't know this information, etc. That's not a useful information at all. So now we have the Iraqi school and the Central Asian school. The school is so big, it has two schools, basically. Okay? Their books, their authorities, their opinions, they've expanded in one way, and the Central Asian scholars expanded in another way, the Iraqiyin and the Khurasaniyin. Now, I'm not trying to say that they're literally in Central Asia and Iraq. What I'm trying to say is that's the school that they've come from. Okay? It's their approach. So now what happens is the process of editing. What is the Shafi'i school? When there's two positions, does that mean Imam Shafi had an opinion and then later had another opinion? Is that the Imam's opinion, or is that an extrapolation from another scholar? Right? Can we always ascribe an extrapolation to the Imam? How does that even work? Right? The position of the school, or is it a personal opinion, not option, based on the interpretive principles and legal maxims? Right? So we have somebody who's saying, this is my own personal opinion. I actually know what the school is, and they understand the school is going one way. I'm actually going another way. So I have my own what's called ikhtiyar. Right? I have my own ikhtiyar, my own choice, my own kind of separate ijtihad. Right? So the school, for example, says that you thought it was Isha still, and so you ate, and then you realized it was actually Fajr. The school says your fast is broken. Ibn Khuzayma's ikhtiyar, not his extrapolation. He didn't extrapolate from the school, but his own objection to the school is no, it's fine because it's analogous to somebody who forgetfully or ignorantly ate out of ignorance. So he goes one direction. That's his ikhtiyar. The school is something else. Imam Muzni's ikhtiyar is that you cannot join prayers on a journey. The school does not say that. So we have to distinguish these things. Sometimes it's mixed up. So what's going on? We need clarity in this huge, huge ocean of scholarship, clarity on what is what. So here again, does this happen to anything other than the form of dhahib? Do you get thorough editing of the fatwa of Sayyidina Ali, of Ibn Abbas, of Ata ibn Rabah? No. So somebody comes along, says, you ask a question, say, is this halal? Say yes. Alhamdulillah, so-and-so of the Salaf did this. One of the many reasons why you cannot follow a position outside of the form of dhahib is because there is no editing process. Historically, this extremely complex process of editing and organizing, explaining a madhab only happens to a madhab. You do not have that with the fatwa of Sayyidina Ali. You do not have that with Ibn Abbas. So I would love to follow the Abbasi madhab or the Alawi madhab or the Atawi madhab, but it just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. When you know what a madhab is, you will see that it doesn't exist anywhere else. You don't have 10, 100,000 people critiquing you and have this critical mass of opinions outside of the form of madhab. It's only within the form of madhab. So somebody says, I just follow the deen. You're following, it's like you saying, I have a stick or I have an iPhone, which is better for, I don't know, communication. It's a no-brainer. It's just totally different levels of sophistication, right? Okay, so editing. Joining prayers. So here's some examples, for example. Initially, many Shafi'is disagreed with the Shafi'i school, and they said, Imam Shafi'i, he holds that Maghrib ends when you finish praying it. But we hold that Maghrib finishes when Isha comes in. So they disagreed. They did not extrapolate, they disagreed. Okay? Many early Shafi'is, they said, if you are sick, you can join prayers. Okay? If you are sick, you can join prayers, even though that's not the Shafi'i school. Okay? Over time, this actually turned into the school, and we'll see why. This did not. So this is the personal opinion of many Shafi'is, not the school. Whereas this is the actual school now. The school is actually the Maghrib ends when Isha comes in. Can everybody hear me? 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Is it very
Yes.
significant,
I can
Musa?
yes.
It's better now, but every couple minutes it'll kind of glitch.
Okay, give me a second. Okay. There's a glitch in the matrix, Badr. Or Sham, right? There was a black cat that went past, right?
Mhm.
I should open my door and see if there's bricks there. Give me a second, guys, okay? Okay. So it's quite a subtle thing, subtle process. Is this the school or is this Shafi'is, certain Shafi'is adopting a position as their personal position? It's a tricky thing sometimes. Okay. Uh, when there's two opinions, is this talking about two different scenarios or is this talking about literally there's two different opinions? Right? So it's confusing. So one person mentions something in one book, another person mentions another book. Are they talking about the same scenario or two different scenarios? The process of sifting through all of this information is pretty difficult. Which position represents the sum of the whole intellectual endeavor? Right? Which of these positions does that? That's what we're trying to do. Sifting out genuine errors. There are certain positions that are just wrong, right? So, for example, Imam Shafi'i mentions a position, Imam Nawawi, he mentions a position in the Majmu' where it's a large book, 29 volumes, something like that, 27 volume book, that the Prophet ﷺ said that when you see a prospective bride, he said, look at her, look at her. So her means her, right? It doesn't mean her clothes, correct? So therefore, you can look at her naked, it's fine, right? So that's a position that exists there in the school. So Imam Shafi'i says this, Imam Nawawi says this position is nothing. That's just an error. That's just like, what are you talking about? Nobody ever said that. Or if they said that, that's just wrong. So there are such things as genuine errors. People will copy things out incorrectly. It happens. So this huge, huge body of opinions and these different things, sifting out what is right and sifting out which is just ridiculous. Like, what is that? There are certain positions like that. Apparently, Imam Shafi is alleged to have said that you don't recite behind the Imam, even if he's reciting quietly. So that doesn't make any sense if you read Imam Shafi's works. Apparently, there's this quote there. You see it. And they just seem, it's just shared. It's just weird. Like, we know Imam Shafi'i wrote extensively on the obligation of reciting behind the Imam. Even if the Imam recites aloud, how is it possible that someone's going to quote him having had said that you don't recite behind the Imam ever, even if he recites quietly? That would be really weird. So there's all these kind of things that like just random, right? So editing the madhab doesn't need to be revised because that's already happened. That's already happened. So this process begins with Imam al-Haramain at the end, approximately Imam al-Haramain at the end of the 5th century. So Imam al-Haramain, this great mutakallim and Shafi'i scholar, he writes a huge commentary on the Mukhtasar al-Muzni, which is like the textbook of that era, called Nihayat al-Matlab, All You'd Ever Want. And he is trying to gather all of the literature of the school together, right? What are all the positions on this issue and debate every single thing, right? He's trying to do that. However, he's not a machine and doesn't have access to every single possible book ever. And so his sources are actually a bit more Central Asian than they are Iraqi. So he's actually it's kind of like editing things out, looking more at the Central Asians than looking at the Iraqi scholars. So Imam al-Haramain is in Haramain, but he's in Iran, I believe, most of his life teaching in the Nizamiya. Um, um, but he is basically more Khurasani than he is Iraqi, right? So if you look at it, it's kind of like it leans that way a little bit more. Imam Ghazali, his student, this is the famous Imam Ghazali, right? He does the same thing. So he writes these 4 books. He writes the Basit, the Wasit, the Wajiz, and the Khulasa. Okay, so the Basit is this huge book that hasn't reached us in Shafi fiqh. Okay, Bast means to expand. Basit does not mean simple, it means expansive, right? Basit. Wajiz is the brief work. That is a key work that has, so the Wasit, afwan, the Wasit is this work that has reached us and we use and it's frequently referred to. Then he wrote a textbook called the Wajiz, and that became the textbook going forward. The people use the Wajiz of Imam al-Ghazali. And he also wrote a Khulasa as well. The Khulasa existence edited by Sheikh Amjad Rashid. Go ahead, Badr.
When you say the Basit didn't reach us, you mean it was just lost?
Yeah, eventually lost over time. So we have quotes from it. I think we have sections from it. We don't have it. So the default is things are lost. That's the default. Like, like, is it true that most fossils have reached us or most fossils have not reached us?
Most have not.
Have not, right? Most animals cannot be fossilized. So actually, we don't really know which ones are fossilized or not. So whenever we're looking to the past, this is now going back, how many years? 1,000 years. It's very difficult to get everything from the past. There'll be a list of like this person wrote 100 books and we have like 3 of them. That's just how it is. Now, some of these books exist. They will be rotting in some library somewhere, but we don't know where they are. And it's locked up by some communist or bombed by somebody else or whatever, right? These kind of things happen. Right? May Allah protect us. So that's why I always tell everybody buy books. When you buy books, books get edited. Then there's more money in the cycle, and then people can go and get these books. Right? But if nobody cares about, the Basit of Imam Ghazali, then it's never going to be found because there's no money to find it. Okay, so he writes this book, okay, the Wasit, and again, like his teacher, he's somewhat Khurasani, but he basically, so Imam Ghazali basically does, the best edit of his time, and he becomes the standard. People are studying his textbook, the Wajiz, and he's very famous and very significant. After him, Imam Rafi comes along, and he writes a commentary, right? So 100 something years after him, he writes a commentary on the Wajiz, this textbook that everyone's studying of Imam Ghazali, and he does the same thing. He organizes all the discussions in the school and organizes all the opinions. But this time it's a better draft because it has more Iraqi sources. So there are certain Iraqi sources that Imam Ghazali, Imam Haramain don't have. Okay, so it's like a fuller research. Exactly, right? So go and try and find like, Galileo or whatever, like original works, you're not going to find them. Okay, so it's a problem anyway. So Imam Rafi'i basically writes this work. So now we're into the 7th century, right? So we've got to think like Ibn Khaldun's about this time. He's in the 8th century, Ibn Khaldun. So Ibn Khaldun is saying things have reached a pinnacle that you can't go beyond. He's talking about in the 8th century, right? So generally speaking, throughout the Islamic sciences and throughout the Islamic history, everything kind of culminates 6th, 7th, 8th century. That's like maturity of Islamic sciences. Okay, so Imam Rafi'i in the beginning of the 7th century, he writes Al-Aziz, Sharh al-Wajiz. He's also called Sharh al-Kabir. And basically he organizes everything together and he becomes the new reference point for the Shafi'is, right? And he writes a textbook as well, a learning book called Al-Muharrar. Then along comes Imam al-Nawawi, okay? And he does the same thing again. So he gets the Imam. He basically uses Imam Rafi'i as the base, and he just tweaks things. So from here to here, there's quite a lot of difference. From here to here, there isn't that much difference. There's less difference. So Imam Nawawi speaking about Rafi. He's like, basically, I'm just finishing off this work. Like I'm not like starting from scratch. So Imam Nawawi, what he does then is he goes through he gets the Al-Aziz Sharh al-Wajiz, which is, I have it here in 13 volumes, and he summarizes it, but tweaks it. So he will disagree. So maybe Imam Rafi will lean one direction, Imam Nawawi will lean another direction. A key thing that Imam Nawawi will do, though, and this is a question that Nada was asking about critical mass, is he will not necessarily follow the majority. So sometimes Imam Rafi'i will say basically like this. There is a 90% vote in one direction, a 10% vote in the other direction. The 90% is correct. Imam Nawawi will flip it. He'll say yes, but the 10% are correct for this reason and this reason and this reason. Right? Imam Nawawi will also object. So he is an editor of the school. He also objects to the school. But again, as a Shafi'i, not as an outsider. So he will say, for example, there are 3 positions on this issue, 1, 2, and 3. And they aren't 2 positions with 1 variable. There are actually 3 positions. These positions are actually not from Imam Shafi, but from the Ashab, from the colleagues, the early Shafi'is. And the more correct position is X, or the correct position is X, depending on how strong the argument is. But I personally adopt this as my own opinion. Right. So there's one thing is which position represents the school, which position is my opinion. Again, a fundamental concept that's lost on a Salafi. They don't know the difference between personally objecting and misrepresenting. So here is the mass of Badr's literary work. Okay? He's written all these poems in Spanish. And I come along and I basically do a selection that best represents his ideas and his work. And then I write my own book, which is my favorite poem. And I basically get one of his a direction that he was going in, and I finish it. So it's kind of like, it's not really him. It's kind of him, kind of me. And so these are 2 different things. There's one is what best represents Badr and what best represents me. So Imam Nawawi, he does these 2 different things. So again, with a Salafi will say, listen, at the end of the day, the former madhahib, they just followed Sahih hadiths. So therefore, my conclusion about what this Sahih hadith says is the former madhahib. Like they're putting words in someone else's mouth. That's a very difficult thing to do, to put words in someone's mouth. It's much easier to just simply disagree. And again, Imam Nawawi doesn't fundamentally disagree. He disagrees as a Shafi'i. He is a Shafi'i. He's trained in the Shafi'i school. He thinks as a Shafi'i. His Shafi'i objections are useful, as opposed to some random dude who turns up and says, oh, I'm going to say this or that, he doesn't understand the system to begin with. It's not a valued objection because it's not even part of the system. Okay. So so that's Imam Nawawi. So then Imam Nawawi, he does that book. He does another book, which is the Sharh al-Muhadhab, the Muhadhab of Shirazi. And he writes, that's a really big work. So that has comparative fiqh in it. It has verse discussions of halal, haram, and hadiths. It's a really big work. I have it in 27 volumes, right? It's called the Majmu', the compendium. So the same thing, organizes the positions. What are the different positions? What is the correct position, right? That's what that book is doing. So Imam Nawawi leaves these kind of two pretty big books, the Rawd al-Talibin and Minhaj and Majmu'. He also writes a textbook which is called the Minhaj, right? That's a textbook, and that will become the textbook for the next 700 years, right? The Minhaj al-Talibin. After Imam Nawawi, Ibn Rif'a comes along. Ibn Rif'a does the same thing. He writes a big commentary. I have it in 20 volumes here, on the Tanbih of Imam Shirazi. So it's a book. He puts all the positions together, organizes them, and he objects to Imam Nawawi here and there. Then along comes al-Isnawi, Jalaluddin al-Isnawi, Egyptian, and he does a rebuttal of everybody. He takes all of these three people apart. So Ibn Rif'a is doing kind of to know Imam Nawawi, not that much. Imam Nawawi is doing that to Rafi, but he's taking them all apart. And so he has a book called Al-Muhimmat, where he basically errors that Imam Rafi'i and Imam Nawawi made. Okay, where did they miss things up or not follow the right position or whatever it is? And he also did the same thing with Ibn Rif'a as well, just in a lesser degree. So then basically Al-Islami puts himself as like, this is the final draft of the madhab. In reality, nobody agrees with Ibn Rif'a and nobody disagrees with Isnawi. The buck stops with Imam Nawawi. And so what happens then is everybody looks at these people, they're looking at these objections, and they're looking at these objections, and they actually say, no, you're actually wrong. You're not actually wrong. He's right. Okay, so it is not that Imam Nawawi came and paid somebody to become king. It's not like that. It's that he actually that basically academically they all thought he was better. So what happened then is through a process of genuine scholarship and meritocratic, meritocracy, however it is, Imam Nawawi became the school. The school today is Imam Nawawi. When we say halal, we mean Imam Nawawi says halal. That's basically how it is. Because he finalized that whole editing process. He's like the final thing on that level. Okay. So now, so he's an editor, he's a spokesman, he also is a critic, he has his own opinions here that we mentioned. He has the Majmu', large book, Rawd Talibin, quite a large book, Minhaj al-Talibin, a study work, and At-Tahqiq, also a study work, but he didn't complete it. And he has a few other books as well. Okay, so now we get to post-Nawawi refinement. Okay, we are now into the 7th to 9th centuries. Okay, so we have explanation. What is he saying? Rebuttals. So again, people like As-Subki, people like Al-Bulqini, people like Al-Isnawi, people like Zarkashi, agreeing or disagreeing. They don't necessarily agree with Imam Nawawi. Right? That doesn't always happen. They're not, in a general sense, the madhab is Imam Nawawi, but not actually, because nobody actually stopped thinking. Nobody just said, as dumb as the thing is, oh, we saw Imam Malik and he couldn't move his arms, so we just started worshipping Imam Malik. Nobody does that. Nobody did that, and nobody does that. That's just a ridiculous way of thinking, right? So then we have, in the 9th to 12th centuries, consolidation, editing, and ultra detail. Okay? So why is that important? So today, when you ask me a question, I will not be quoting Imam Shafi'i for obvious reasons that we know. I will not be quoting Imam al-Ghazali for obvious reasons that we know. I will not be quoting Ibn Mundhir or Ibn Jarir Tabari for obvious reasons. And I'm not even going to be quoting Imam Nawawi. There's basically like 2 layers after Imam Nawawi. Consolidation of all those debates, editing, and ultra detail. Right? So that really culminates with Zakaria Ansari, Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria Ansari in the 9th, 10th century, 9th century, in the end of the 9th century, and his students Ibn Hajar and Ramli. So today, practically speaking, the Deen of Allah, as per the Shafi'is, is basically Ibn Hajar and Ramli. That is basically all we're interested in because they are like the culmination of the culmination of the culmination. And so we have these key works, and I just, to show how it's not that simple, this is Al-Hafidh al-Munawi, the great hadith scholar. He says, scholars of the 10th century generally followed whatever Imam Nawawi held was right. That said, it is only fair to say that the hadith that indicates that it is forbidden implies that it is offensive and not sinful. Okay? Um, so here's an example of Al-Munawi saying, yeah, I know we've all become Nawis, but that's not really the case, is it? We don't actually literally accept every single thing that Imam Nawawi says, right? So here's just an example of that, right? Here's a rebuttal, for example. In Bushra Kareem, you might have seen me use this book all the time in my Q&A, right? Late work. It says they were not concerned that Imam Shafi said it was halal. They just disagreed with him. Big deal. Because we're looking at the net result, not Imam Shafi himself. So no one stopped thinking. Everybody did critical reception at every single juncture. And there's interpenetrative criticism. So that nobody becomes God and then you can't reject him. That never actually happens. Right? It's not like, oh, there's a certain point, khalas, we became Nawis. Like literally. It's relatively, Imam Nawawi became the default, but not literally. Ibn Hajar Ramli relatively become these reference points, but not literally, right? There's other scholars will debate, and which is how it is, right? So the Shafi school then is a matrix, not a set. Okay, a matrix. What does that mean? It means it's like 3D. This thing affects this and affects that, right? All the discussions are connected. So our discussion in Tayammum affects our discussion in Zakat al-Fitr, which affects our discussion in Hajj, which affects our discussion here, which is there. Every single thing is one big unit, right? One big unit, right? So it's a matrix, right? A whole interconnected set of millions of legal and moral answers. There's fixed research method. There is clarity and maturity along with variety. Okay? So what's your alternative? Quran and Sunnah, Habibi? You're asking, it's not about what we're understanding, it's about how we are understanding it. It's not about the ingredients that we're using. The ingredients of Quran and Sunnah, nothing else. But the chef that made this cake, right? The chef that made this maqluba, made this thing. So you think that the input is the same as the output, but the input is one thing, the process is something else, and the output is something else. Fundamental misunderstandings. So what if the four madhabs agree on something? Here's a question, right? What if the four madhabs all agree on something? For example, 20 rakahs of Taraweeh. What are you going to say about that?
It's a very strong opinion.
It's a very, because given how, we're not trying to say Imam Shafi agrees with Imam Abu Hanifa. We're not even talking about the Imams. We're talking about the Imams within the madhahib. Thousands of scholars agreeing, disagreeing, very happy to disagree, and they all agree upon something. You've got a problem. The four madhahib all agree that musical instruments are haram, right? That's the four madhahib, right? So it's very problematic. So there's a key thing, right? When you say forget the four madhahib, there's almost an aqidah issue. Like it's almost an aqidah issue when you say I just fought Al-Quran and Sunnah, right? It's a very, very dangerous thing to say. If you know what it is, the issue is they don't know what it is. People think the four madhahib is like basically four imams. They came to conclusions about 1,000 years ago. Should we follow them or not? Yeah, that's obviously, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about it's to renegade against the whole of the Islamic civilization. That's what it is. When you're going against the four madhahib, that's essentially what you're doing, right? It's a huge thing. So as repeating the quote from Ibn Khaldun, he says, the marketplaces of these religious disciplines have thrived in this religious community in an unsurpassable manner. Scholarly discernments have reached a level that cannot be exceeded. Nomenclatures have been refined and disciplines have been arranged with a beauty that cannot be outdone. Craftsmanship in these crafts, I mentioned this before. So, gross lack of knowledge of history and civilization. That's how you can have a Salafi. That's how you can have a racist, right? This person, this person told me in California, in my face, he said, you know, um, whatever happens to the African American community is their own fault. They did it to themselves, right? So, like, what do you mean they did it to themselves? What he meant is there were some African people who were involved in the slave trade. So therefore, all generations of African American people can suffer because of that, because it's like gross lack of history and civilization, like knowledge of anything. You just say like crazy things, right? Or you think that white people deserve America. It's like, well, you're not from America, are you? In fact, you're not even from England, right? The Celts are probably dark skinned, who knows? So it's like it's kind of silly. Like you just have to be stupid to have these ideas. But alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, many of us have PhDs in stupidity, right? And stupidity is the default medium through which we are convinced to do things. Go ahead,
Me?
yeah, Abdul Jalil, yeah, go ahead.
Um, because you always say like the Salafis do this and this. I don't know how it is in your countries, but as far as me, I live in Germany, and most of the Salafis here they're just Hanbali, and there's like a little branch of Salafis who follow the Albani approach, and they are the ones like against madhahib, and
Alhamdulillah
they
Rabbil Alameen.
always.
That's good. That's good.
So I'm always
That's a
confused
total
when you
a
say
totally
that.
different, a totally different. So they're basically Salafi and Aqidah, Hanbali and fiqh, right?
Yes, yes.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. At least we're like somewhat on planet Earth. But that's not the default, like in Jordan, Egypt, Syria, when you say Salafi or Ahl Hadith in Indo-Pak, it's not like that. Or the average person, Jaleel, right? The average person says Quran and Sunnah, right? As a default. Like I don't know what these things are, just Quran and Sunnah. That's what they don't know history, they don't know about civilization, right?
Right.
Right. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So four edited schools, four concatenate paths back to the Sahaba. There we go. Use the word concatenate and in your speech on the khutbah, right? So what happens then if you are non-graduate? There's no acquisition of the faculty. You didn't learn the malaka, you didn't get fit, right? So there's no isnad. If you're not graduated from one of the former dhahib, you don't have an isnad back to the Sahaba, right? There are no contending alternatives to the four schools. You can't find something other than the four schools that could possibly contend with them. You could either score A or B or C or D. That's it. Okay, makes sense, inshallah?
Yes.
Okay, so today now, when I will say something halal or haram, I am going to be talking about what Ibn Hajar says, Ramli says, and the commentators on Ibn Hajar Ramli. That's what I'm going to be doing, basically. Right? So when I say, for example, Ba'ishan is his commentary. It's like him basically looking at Ibn Hajar Ramli and other people as well, and later scholars. But basically, that's what they're doing. So everything will revolve around that later period, right? So if you come and look at my library, I've got like, I don't know how many hundreds of volumes here. But then basically everything that's relevant, meaning immediately relevant, that when I don't want to do deep research, is going to be basically in the last 2 to 3 to 400 years, basically. Because that's where all the late works are, and it's ultra refined. It is not because I'm following somebody in the the 12th century as opposed to somebody following in the early century. It is because, as what did Newton say? If I saw far, I did but stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So they are basically the culmination because they're following the same system, as opposed to a revisionist. A revisionist looks at things, is not a continuation of them because he doesn't look at things in the same way. Okay? It doesn't do that. And then we look at our book, like if we go back to here, Reliance of the Traveler. Reliance of the Traveler is written. Reliance of the Traveler is written about this time. Amdad al-Salik, Ibn Naqib al-Misri about this time. So what he's doing is he's mentioning this. He's mentioning what Rafi'i says and what Imam Nawawi says. But Sheikh Nuh Kala, in his translation, does not include the translations there. He just puts Imam Nawawi. Why would he do that?
Because it's irrelevant.
Why is it irrelevant? Because we agree with Imam Nawawi. Imam Nawawi became the default, right? So you're studying this book in English. You don't need to see what Imam Rafi says. So if the Arabic will say X, and then it says, and it's also said Y, Imam Rafi. So a little bit after Imam Ibn Naqib al-Misri, eventually Imam Nawawi becomes the one authority, right? Okay. And so, but it's because it's not super early, there won't be things that are errors, but there'll be certain things that need to be explained a bit more, right? So generally I don't teach books like that. I teach books that are like in this stage of history, here, right? So Muqaddimah Hadramiyya is in this stage. Risal al-Jami'ah, Ship of Salvation, this stage. The Fath al-Mu'in class, that's at this stage as well. The Tanqih al-Lubab, same thing. All right. But so it's it makes it a little bit difficult because it's kind of a bit old. Right. Khair inshallah. We'll stop here inshallah ta'ala. Everyone has an idea. And I think next week will be the first class of the actual book, the first class of the actual text, inshallah. Inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.
Sheikh,
Yes.
hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Sheikh, I'm on my way to Karachi. I'm